Tomato, tomato, meritage, meritage. How exactly do you pronounce these words? Also, what exactly is the average wine enthusiast drinking now? All that and so much more on this episode of The Average Wine Enthusiast. Hi there, everybody. My name's Mike LaPlante, and I'm the average wine enthusiast. I thought on this episode that I would talk about a type of wine that really isn't a type of wine. It is a class of wine, but yet it's not really a class of wine. It's its own little thing, and I thought that makes this type of wine a good subject for a show. I know a lot of folks have come across these types of wines and maybe weren't sure what exactly made them what they are. And of course, I'm talking about Meritage. Meritage wines, it's a unique type of wine in so much that not everybody makes them, but yet they are made all over the world. Kind of an interesting concept, really. There's no Meritage in France. There's no Meritage in Italy. There's no Meritage in Spain either. It is a unique thing unto itself. What exactly is a Meritage wine, you ask? Well, it's a wine that is blended, and it has to have two or more specific varietals in them. What varietals am I talking about? I'm talking about the noble grapes. And I know I did a show at some point in the beginning there about the noble grapes. I think I also talked about them on the Cabernet Sauvignon show as well, where I proceeded to pronounce it Cabernet Sauvignon, but that's another story for another time. So if you're not aware of what the Bordeaux noble grapes are, they are Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Petit Verdot, and Carmenere. Some good Carmenere. There's also a white Meritage classification, which I don't think was initially in there, but it's made with Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and a grape varietal known as Muscadel du Bordelais. So there's three to choose from in there. Why have Meritage wines? Well, good question. Back in 1988, there was a group of vintners in California who had the impression that they needed to market their wines a very specific way. You got to remember, about 10 years prior to that, they had won, a couple California wines had won the competition there in France. There was a showdown in France, or I forget exactly what it is. Watch the Bottle Shock movie and you'll get a good lineup on the story there. So anyway, these California vintners, what they thought was a relatively strict set of rules that they had to follow in selling their wine, wanted to create something that wasn't around yet. And in concept, it's actually a very good idea. You see, for a winemaker to make a single varietal of any wine and put that varietal name on the label, you have to have at least 75% of that varietal in the bottle. That's the rules for North America. In Europe, it's 85. What a lot of these vintners in California were thinking is, well, wait a minute, our wines, we feel, are better than many of the wines that are in Bordeaux, which all Bordeaux wine is a blend of something. That's the whole thing about French wine, is you know what wine you're getting based on the location. It's all about the location in France. So what the California vintners in 1988 were thinking, they're thinking, we also want to create a blend, or we have created blends that we think are superior to many of the best wines coming out of Bordeaux. However, many of these blends did not exceed the 75% varietal to make it any one given varietal. So it got lumped into basically red blend, or what then in 1988, you got to remember there wasn't as much good wine out there as there is now. So any red blend out there was thought of as table wine. Think of those Gallo wine commercials. And Gallo made a ton of money selling table wine, basically. Nothing special, nothing great about it. Came in big jugs, and people drank that stuff up. Now Gallo, it turns out to be one of the stakeholders in some of the most premium wines out of California. They have lots of brands that people associate with really good wine. Kind of ironic, sort of. But back in 1988, these wineries wanted to create, well, they were creating these red blends that were fantastic, but they were getting into, they were getting lumped into this red blend table wine stuff, which it wasn't. They actually thought it was better than many of their single varietals that they were producing. So what do you do about that? You got to start marketing this red blend that you're having as something that is actually more special than this awesome Cabernet Sauvignon we're making, or this awesome Merlot that we're making. So they set out to create the Meritage Association. Where did the name Meritage come from? I think they had a contest, and they had, I just heard the number, I want to say it was over 1,000 entries into what they should be calling this new red blend. It had to convey some kind of quality and some kind of integrity. So somebody decided to make it's called a portmanteau. A portmanteau. That's taking a sound from one word and a sound from another word and putting them together. And they got the word merit, and they got the word heritage, and they called it Meritage. So that's why you can't pronounce it Meritage, because, well, for one thing, you're making it sound French, and that's exactly the thing that they want to separate themselves from. They want to make it sound as though this is a very American thing. So that's the impetus behind creating this Meritage Association, which now is called the Meritage Alliance. Because you never know, you're going to be making wine on Mars someday. I don't know. So that's the history of why we have Meritage wine. Now, do you see a lot of Meritage wine in your local wine store? No, you don't, because, well, for one thing, it costs money for you to call your wine a Meritage wine. The price is $1 per case. So for every case of Meritage you sell, you have to give the Meritage Alliance $1, up to a cap of $500. So it's $500, $500 US to belong to the Meritage group. So some people pay it, some people don't. Is this going to be a viable thing going into the future? I don't know, because there's a ton of wineries out there that don't use it, that have a red blend that they market as their thing. One that comes to the top of mind is Cassini Cellars. They sell a wine called Nobilis. It just gives you the impression that there's definitely some good quality in this wine, and I believe it is a Cabernet Sauvignon and a Merlot and something else that they also put in there. And it's a fantastic wine, and it's definitely one of their top-end wines. So where do you usually see a Meritage is at the winery itself. So if you go to a winery and they are a winery that has a Meritage wine to offer, what you'll usually find is that the Meritage is at the top of the tasting. So, you would start with a rosé, and maybe then their Pinot Noir, and then maybe their Cabernet Sauvignon, and then their Meritage. And I've been to wineries where they offer a Meritage for sale, but they won't open one up. They won't have one open for a tasting. If you want to taste their Meritage, you have to buy a bottle of it. So that's where the Meritage sits in the hierarchy of any winery that has a Meritage license to sell that wine. I recently went to a winery out here, my favorite winery. If anybody doesn't know this, it's Meritage Winery. And they have a very good Meritage. Interestingly enough, though, their Syrah was so good, their 2013 Syrah, that they actually made that their flagship wine. This Meritage here, which is a 2017, I believe it sells for $35. And their Syrah, which is a 2013, sells for $40. So they have put that on another level, which is kind of interesting that, that they pay the Meritage fee, but yet they'll put another wine that they make at the top of their list, which their Syrah that they're selling right now is a 2013. So that's, it's getting up there. And I just recently had some, and I would have to say that now that Syrah is beginning to decline, and now that their Meritage is definitely the wine to get out of Meritage. Having said that, they're releasing their 2016 Syrah very shortly. They did not create any Syrah in 2014 or 2015, as many wineries that are on the north shore of Lake Erie here suffered because of the polar vortex. It wiped out quite a few vines, and the same story holds true in Niagara as well. So there's an exception to the rule as far as a Meritage being, the top of the heap, the king of the hill. Their Syrah, to them, which rightly so, was definitely their killer wine. Last night, I had the pleasure of opening a bottle of this, which is Summerhill Winery. They make a Meritage as well, and this is their 2014 Meritage. I was able to get my hands on a few bottles of this because I have a membership at Summerhill. And Summerhill, if you're not aware, is in British Columbia, just in the southern part of Kelowna. And they source their grapes all throughout the Okanagan Valley. And but that last night was my first opportunity to try their Meritage, and I have to admit it is an extremely delicious wine. Opened up beautifully. I think I decanted it for a couple hours, but even after that, it continued to show new life, new colors, I should say, and it was definitely a very good wine to be drinking. So I guess that's going to do it for the subject of Meritage. So next time you're at a winery, make sure you don't pronounce it Meritage, and ask them what their blend is, because like this Meritage right here, it has no indication of what the blends of, what grapes they actually did use in this bottle of wine. Did they do that on the Meritage wines? So no indication of what the varietals were that went into their Meritage. And I know I've been to some wineries where they won't tell you. They think they feel like it's a secret, that no, we can't tell you what our blend is, because it's private or corporate intellectual property that can't be shared. So some people are very very protective of what they do in their wines. For competition reasons, I'm not exactly sure, but Meritage, check it out the next time you're at a winery, because I would say next time you go to a wine store, but odds are high that you won't find a Meritage, but I know that most of you know what a Meritage is. You know of the existence of a Meritage, and now you know a whole lot more about Meritage than you did 10 minutes ago. So what's the average wine enthusiast drinking now? Well, this episode, I wanted to tell you about a wine that you can find every year, maybe a couple times a year. The LCBO here usually stocks it at least a couple times a year. And that's this wine from La Gravias. Sometimes they supply the Ségret, and sometimes they supply the Sablé. Sablé was the little village that we stayed at when we were in the Côte d'Or area, and that's where the winery is in Sablé. But they also source grapes from Ségret, which I believe is a Côte d'Or village. So there they have a very specific blend, back to the blend thing, that they use in their wines that is different than the blend that they use in Sablé. The Ségret is a little higher altitude, and the quality is pretty much up there, but you can find this wine. It's a La Gravias, which they make a lot of wine, thousands and thousands of cases that they ship all around the world. And you can find their wine usually on your shelf of your local wine store in the French section. Not very expensive, usually sub $20, but it's some version of Grenache and Syrah. Usually some other grape also is put in there. Do they actually say on the back of the bottle? It is just Grenache and Syrah. There is no other grape involved in the process. So the percentages are probably a little different compared to Sablé, but if you see a Sablé La Gravias, pick that up as well. I bought in cases of both of them because of the value. This is an extremely good value, some really good French wine that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, and it's delicious. So that is what the average wine enthusiast is drinking now. I guess that's going to do it for this episode. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. One more thing I'd like to ask you to do is, if you have any friends who are like you, who are watching videos on YouTube about wine, turn them on to the average wine enthusiast. I'd really appreciate it. Another thing I really appreciate is the Big Organ Trio for letting me use their music at the beginning and end of this show. Until next time, my name is Mike LaPlante, and I'm the average wine enthusiast. Salut! But what am I really drinking now? I'm really drinking some rosé. It's the afternoon. It's a good time to drink rosé. Never had any rosé with my eggs this morning, but this rosé that I'm enjoying now has a very unusual hue. It's somewhat dark, and I just got it from Volcanic Hills. Saw an ad in my Facebook feed of all places, clicked on it, and next thing you know, I got 3 bottles of Volcanic Hills showing up at my door. I've been getting so much BC wine lately, thanks in part to Carl's Wine Club. If you're interested in Canadian wine, I'm just going to put it that way, Carl's Wine Club is a great source to get it, because what they do is they approach wineries and they put together packages of quality Canadian wines. The majority of them are out of British Columbia, and they ship them to you. Usually that's the deal that they make. So you get this, special package that they put together, and the shipping is usually relatively inexpensive, as opposed to, if you were to approach the winery yourself. That was part of the appeal of this year. They shipped 3 bottles of their wine to me for free. So free's good. But that wasn't through Carl's Wine Club. That was just, like I said, an ad in Facebook. It's interesting when you visit enough wine Facebook pages, the ads you see are going to be wine-based for sure. So the Volcanic Hills, This is their rosé. Carl actually knows the winemaker over at Volcanic Hills, and he had some things to say that I won't repeat here, but this rosé was actually, it's pretty good. Myself, I like a rosé. If I'm sure I've mentioned this before. That's got the where this stuff was made, basically in the Côte d'Aron, southern France area, Provence. But this is made with Gamay, and it has a pomegranate, rhubarb notes in it with a little bit of minerality to it as well, and bright acidity. It's a yummy rosé, and if you see an ad in your Facebook feed, I would highly recommend you pick it up. It wasn't very much, maybe $80, and I got three of these bottles shipped to my house. That was all in $80. So I could recommend this rosé, and here's to the winemaker over at Volcanic Hills for making a decent rosé.